She locked the only storm shelter in the neighborhood, while the tornado sirens were already screaming. The sound hit first. That low, rising wail cutting through the humid Texas air like something alive, something hunting. I was still stepping out of my truck when the wind shifted, sharp and electric, carrying that metallic tang you only notice when the sky is about to turn on you. Gravel crunched under my boots as I moved faster, eyes scanning the cul-de-sac where everyone else was already running. Doors slamming, kids crying. The kind of panic people try to keep quiet but can't. The storm shelter sat at the center of the community park, a reinforced concrete box designed for moments exactly like this. 30 yards away. Close enough to feel safe. Close enough to believe you'd make it. I reached the steel door just as it slammed shut in my face with a heavy, final clang. The echo rang in my ears longer than it should have. My hand hit the handle instinctively, but it didn't budge. Locked. I blinked once, trying to process it, then knocked. Hard. The kind of knock that says this isn't a question. The small reinforced window slid open just enough for me to see her face. Linda Whitmore, HOA president. Perfect hair, even in a wind advisory. Clipboard still tucked under her arm like this was just another Tuesday inspection. Residents only, she said, her voice calm, controlled, like she was denying access to a pool, not a storm shelter with a rotating wall of wind bearing down at 70 miles per hour. I stared at her for a second, the siren climbing higher behind me, the air pressure dropping just enough to make your ears pop. This is an emergency shelter, I said, keeping my voice level. Yeah, she replied, not even flinching. For registered residents. Liability rules. The window snapped shut before I could answer. I stood there, hands still on the cold steel, feeling the vibration of the wind starting to build. Behind me, someone shouted. A trash can went skidding across the street, bouncing off a mailbox with a hollow clang. I took a step back, eyes drifting to the heavy-duty lock on the door, then to the small control panel mounted beside it. Keypad. Indicator light. Status display. I didn't say another word. Didn't argue. Didn't raise my voice. I just turned around and walked away. The siren didn't stop. It never does. It just keeps climbing until it feels like it's inside your chest. I crossed the street, boots hitting pavement faster now, not running, not panicking, just moving with purpose. The wind picked up, pushing against my back, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't hit yet. 3 minutes. That's about how long it takes for people to realize they made a mistake they can't undo. I reached my truck, opened the door, and grabbed what I needed. No rush. No hesitation. When I closed the door, the sound got swallowed by the wind. I turned back toward the shelter, watching the trees bend just a little too far, watching the sky darken in that unnatural way that makes everything look flat and wrong. And as I walked back, I could already see Linda through that small reinforced window again, still standing there, still in control. Or at least she thought she was. I could feel the wind pushing harder now, not in gusts anymore, but in steady pressure, like the air itself had weight. The sky had gone that strange green-gray color that makes everything look unreal, like you were standing inside a photograph just before it tears. My truck door clicked open and the interior still held the faint smell of coffee and warm plastic from the drive home, completely out of place against what was building outside. I reached under the center console and pulled out a small black case, the kind nobody ever notices unless they know what they are looking for. It was scuffed at the edges, worn from years of use, and heavier than it looked. My fingers closed around it without hesitation. Muscle memory. The sirens kept climbing, echoing off the houses, bouncing between the brick walls and trimmed hedges that Linda cared so much about. Somewhere behind me, a dog was barking nonstop, sharp and frantic, like it could feel the pressure drop before anyone else. I stepped back out and shut the door, the sound getting swallowed instantly by the wind. 30 yards again. Same distance. Different weight this time. Each step forward felt deliberate, measured, not rushed, not panicked, just precise. Gravel shifted under my boots as I crossed the street, and I could see more people gathering near the shelter now, a few knocking on the door, others yelling through the metal, their voices thin against the storm. The small window slid open again, Linda's face appearing like she was checking tickets at a theater instead of watching a funnel cloud form on the horizon. Her lips moved, issuing instructions, probably repeating the same line about regulations and liability. I did not slow down. My eyes were on the panel mounted to the right of the door. Industrial grade. Weather sealed. County installed. I had seen hundreds of them, wired dozens myself. The indicator light blinked red in a steady rhythm, locked status confirmed. The kind of detail most people would ignore. The kind of detail that tells you exactly how a system is thinking. I stopped a few feet from the door this time. Not reaching for the handle. Not knocking. Just standing there, letting the wind whip around me, carrying dust and the faint smell of rain that was seconds away from turning into something much worse. One of the residents turned to me, eyes wide, voice tight. "She is not letting anyone else in," he said, like he needed me to understand the situation. I gave a small nod, already knowing. My attention stayed on the panel. 4-digit keypad. Override port just below it. A thin seam where the housing met the wall, barely visible unless you knew where to look. I set the black case on the ground and flipped it open. Inside, everything was exactly where it should be. Clean. Organized. Ready. The wind surged again, stronger this time, rattling the shelter door hard enough to make the hinges groan. The window snapped shut from the inside. I could almost picture Linda stepping back, thinking she had secured her authority along with that lock. I picked up the access card from the case, the surface smooth and cool against my fingers, and for just a second I let my eyes drift to the small county seal embedded in the corner. Most people would not recognize it. Most people were not supposed to. Another gust hit, pulling at my jacket, carrying a low, distant roar that did not belong to the siren. That was the sound people never forget. I stepped closer to the panel, raised the card, and lined it up with the reader, the red light still blinking like it thought it was in charge of the situation. It stayed that way, right up until the moment it did not. The card hovered for half a second in front of the reader, close enough that I could hear the faint hum inside the panel, the system alive and waiting for the right input. The red light blinked once more, steady and confident, like it had already decided the answer. Then I pressed the card against the surface. There was a soft click, almost lost in the wind, followed by a sharp electronic chirp that cut clean through the noise around us. The red light froze, then flipped to green. Everything changed in that instant. The lock inside the steel door released with a deep mechanical thunk, the kind of sound you feel more than hear. The handle shifted slightly on its own, tension gone. A second later, a calm automated voice came through the external speaker mounted above the panel, clear and neutral, completely indifferent to the storm. Emergency override activated. County access protocol engaged. The words hung in the air for a split second before the wind tried to tear them away. Around me, the small group of residents went quiet, confusion replacing panic just long enough for reality to catch up. The door swung open a few inches, pushed from the inside now instead of held shut. Linda appeared again, but this time her expression had changed. The confidence was gone, replaced by something tighter, something uncertain. "What did you just do?" she asked, her voice sharper now, no longer calm. I did not raise my voice. I did not step back. I simply reached for the door and pulled it fully open, the heavy steel moving smoothly now that the lock had been disengaged. Warm, stale air from inside the shelter rushed out to meet the storm, carrying the scent of concrete and too many people packed into a space meant for emergencies. I opened it. I said, keeping my tone even. No explanation. No argument. Just the truth. The people behind me did not wait for permission. They moved past, one after another, stepping into the shelter quickly but not chaotically, like the decision had already been made for them the moment that green light appeared. A man placed a hand on my shoulder as he passed, a silent thank you carried in the pressure of his grip. A mother guided her 2 kids inside, their shoes scraping against the concrete floor as the wind howled louder behind us. Linda stepped to the side, still holding her clipboard, but it looked smaller now, less like authority and more like paper. "You cannot just override HOA property like that," she said, trying to regain control, trying to find footing in rules that no longer applied. The automated voice answered before I did, repeating the protocol in the same calm tone. "Emergency override in effect. Local authority supersedes private access restrictions." That was the moment it landed. Not just for her, but for everyone standing there. The system had already decided. I did not need to argue. I did not need to prove anything. It was built into the structure itself, into the wiring, into the code behind that panel. The wind surged again, stronger than before, rattling the door against its hinges, and I held it open until the last person stepped inside. Then I followed, turning back just long enough to look at Linda, who was still standing there, staring at the panel like it had betrayed her personally. I reached for the door, met her eyes for a brief second, and then pulled it closed behind us, the lock now working exactly the way it was always supposed to. The door sealed with a heavy, final click, and just like that, the world outside became something distant, something muffled behind layers of reinforced concrete and steel. The sound of the wind did not disappear, but it changed. It turned into a low, constant roar that vibrated through the walls, like standing next to a passing freight train you could not see. Inside, the air felt thick, warmer than it should have been, carrying the mixed scents of damp clothing, cheap perfume, and the faint dust of poured concrete. People were packed shoulder to shoulder, breathing a little too fast, speaking in hushed voices that overlapped into a quiet hum. I moved a few steps in, letting the door settle behind me, eyes adjusting to the dim emergency lighting running along the ceiling. It flickered once, then held steady. Reliable. Designed for moments like this. A child somewhere to my left asked if the storm was over, their voice small but clear, and their mother answered with a soft reassurance that sounded more like hope than certainty. I leaned back against the wall near the entrance, close enough to the panel on the inside to hear the faint electronic hum still running through it. The system was active now. Override mode. It would stay that way until the all-clear came through, or until someone with the right authority reset it. Across the room, Linda stood near the center, still holding that clipboard like it was the last piece of control she had left. Her posture was rigid, shoulders tight, eyes scanning the room as if she could will things back into the shape she preferred. But nobody was looking at her anymore. The attention had shifted, quietly but completely. A man near the front spoke up, his voice low but steady. "That was county access, right?" he asked, glancing in my direction without fully turning. I gave a small nod. No speech. No explanation. Just enough. The information moved through the room faster than any announcement could. You could see it in the way people's shoulders dropped just slightly, in the way their breathing slowed by a fraction. Not calm, not safe, but closer to it. Another deep surge of wind slammed against the shelter, harder this time, strong enough to make the overhead lights flicker again. A few people flinched instinctively, hands tightening around whatever they were holding. The structure held without question. It was built for this. Always had been. Linda took a step toward me, heels clicking softly against the concrete floor, the sound out of place in a room designed for survival. "You should have identified yourself," she said, her voice lower now, less performative, more controlled frustration than authority. I met her eyes for a brief second, then glanced past her toward the door, where the faint outline of dust was starting to slip. Through the lower seal, carried by the pressure outside. "You should have opened it," I replied, just as evenly. No edge, no raised tone, just a statement that did not need emphasis. She held my gaze for a moment longer, then looked away first, her grip tightening around the clipboard until her knuckles turned pale. Another announcement crackled faintly through the external system, distorted by the storm but still recognizable as an emergency broadcast. Words like warning and rotation cut in and out, enough to remind everyone exactly why they were here. I shifted my weight against the wall, listening to the structure, feeling the subtle vibrations travel through the concrete. Everything was functioning exactly as it should. Systems do not care about opinions. They do not care about titles or neighborhood rules. They respond to authority that is built into them, written into their design long before anyone decided who was in charge of a homeowners association. And right now, that authority was not hers. The roar outside shifted again, deeper this time, less like wind and more like something moving with direction. You could feel it through the soles of your boots, a low vibration that traveled up through the concrete and settled somewhere in your chest. Conversations inside the shelter dropped even lower, voices tightening, breaths held just a second longer than normal. Nobody needed an announcement to understand what was happening above us. I kept my back against the wall, one hand resting lightly near the panel, not touching it, just close enough to feel the faint warmth coming off the circuitry. The system was still humming steady, green indicator holding firm. Override active. No interruptions. Across the room, A man in a construction jacket pulled out his phone, stared at the screen, then shook his head when he saw there was no signal. Another person tried the same thing, same result. The world outside had already cut them off. No updates, no reassurance, just the sound. Linda shifted her weight again, pacing 2 small steps before stopping, like she wanted to say something but could not find the version of it that would put her back in control. Her eyes kept drifting toward the door, then back to the people, then to me. Calculating, reframing. The clipboard was still in her hands, but the pen clipped to it had gone untouched. A woman near the center of the room spoke quietly, asking if anyone knew how long this would last. Someone answered with a guess, 10 minutes, maybe 15, but their voice carried uncertainty. I let the question hang for a moment, listening to the structure again, counting the intervals between the heavier impacts against the outer shell. It will pass, I said finally, not loud, just clear enough for the nearest people to hear. This type usually does. I did not explain how I knew. Did not mention the training, the field work, the long hours spent studying systems built for exactly this kind of pressure. Information works best when it is simple. The words moved outward from where I stood, repeated in quieter tones, reshaped slightly, but carrying the same message. It will pass. The tension did not disappear, but it changed. Less panic, more endurance. Another surge hit the shelter, strong enough to make a few people brace themselves instinctively, hands against the wall, feet adjusting for balance. The lights flickered once more, then steadied again, proving the backup system was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Linda stopped pacing and looked at me directly now, no pretense left in her expression. "You work for the county," she said, not a question this time, more like something she was forcing into place in her mind. I met her gaze for a second, then nodded once. That was enough. Her shoulders dropped just slightly, the smallest shift, but noticeable. The kind of movement that comes when someone realizes the rules they have been using do not apply anymore. Around us, the noise outside began to change again, not gone, but moving, pulling away, like the pressure was lifting inch by inch. The roar softened into something less focused, less immediate. A few people noticed it at the same time, heads tilting, listening carefully. The child from earlier spoke again, asking if it was over this time, and their mother hesitated before answering. I pushed off the wall slowly, stepping closer. To the door, not opening it, just standing near it, feeling the difference in the air pressure along the seal. Almost there. Systems respond in stages. Storms do too. And right now, everything was moving exactly the way it was supposed to. The pressure against the door eased first, subtle but unmistakable, like the air outside had taken a step back. I rested my hand lightly against the steel surface, feeling the difference through the metal, the vibrations no longer sharp or focused, just residual, fading. Inside the shelter, people started to notice it too, not all at once, but in small shifts. Shoulders lowering, breaths coming easier, conversations picking up just slightly, cautious at first, like nobody wanted to say it out loud too soon. The overhead lights held steady now, no flicker, no hesitation. The system settling back into normal operation after riding the edge for the past several minutes. I glanced at the panel again. The green indicator was still on, override still active, holding the door in a state that ignored everything except higher authority. That was the part most people never think about. Systems are built with a hierarchy, layers of control that only matter when everything else fails. Behind me, someone let out a quiet laugh, the kind that slips out when tension finally cracks. Another person exhaled deeply, long and slow, like they had been holding it the entire time. The child's voice came again, softer now, asking if they could go home, and this time the answer they got sounded more certain. Linda had not moved far from where she stood, but the energy around her was different now. The edge was gone. No more commands. No more corrections. Just a woman standing in a room where the rules she relied on had not held up under pressure. She looked at the door, then at the panel, then back at me, like she was trying to trace back the exact moment things shifted out of her control. The answer was simple, but not the kind you explain out loud. I reached for the handle slowly, not opening it yet, just testing the weight, the resistance. The seal held firm, but the pressure difference was nearly gone now. Safe to check soon, but not yet. Timing matters more than speed in situations like this. Outside, The sound had dropped to something distant, the kind of wind you expect after a storm passes through, not the kind that tears at structures. A faint rattle of debris skittering across pavement filtered through the walls, lighter, less urgent. I stepped back from the door and turned slightly toward the room. "We will wait another minute," I said, calm and measured. No rush, no guesswork, just procedure. People nodded without question. That was the difference now. Trust had shifted, quietly but completely. Not because I demanded it, but because the system had already proven who it responded to. Linda took a small breath, then another, like she was resetting herself. "I was following the rules," she said, not defensive this time. More like she needed to say it for herself. I looked at her, then at the door, then back again. "Those were not the rules that mattered," I replied. No accusation, no judgment, just clarity. She did not answer. The silence that followed was not heavy. It was reflective. Around us, people adjusted their stance, some sitting down along the walls, others checking on neighbors, small acts of normalcy returning piece by piece. I turned back to the door, watching the seam at the bottom where the last traces of dust had settled. The storm had moved on. Systems had held. And the only thing left now was to open the door at the right moment. Not because someone decided it, but because everything said it was time. I waited exactly 60 seconds. Not because I needed to count, but because experience teaches you that the difference between safe and almost safe is usually measured in moments like that. The shelter had gone quiet in a different way now. Not tense, not fearful, just attentive. People were listening for something that was no longer there. The roar had faded into a distant whisper, and even that was breaking apart into normal wind, the kind that moves through trees instead of tearing past them. I reached for the handle again, this time with intent, feeling the cool metal under my palm. No vibration, no pressure pushing back. Just wait. I turned it slowly. The latch released with a soft mechanical click, clean and controlled, exactly how it was designed. When I pulled the door open, the outside air rushed in, carrying the sharp scent of wet earth and broken leaves. It was cooler now, fresher, like the storm had taken something heavy with it when it moved on. The sky beyond the doorway looked uneven, patches of gray pulling apart to reveal lighter tones behind them. Debris was scattered across the street, small things mostly, branches, loose trash, a lawn chair tipped on its side halfway down the block. Nothing catastrophic, just the kind of aftermath that reminds you how close it came. People moved carefully at first, stepping out in small groups, eyes scanning their surroundings, taking in what had changed and what had not. The relief was quiet but real, carried in the way they stood a little taller, breathed a little deeper. A man stepped past me and looked back once, giving a short nod before heading toward his house. The mother with the two kids guided them out, one hand on each shoulder, her voice softer now, reassuring in a way that sounded certain this time. I stayed near the door, holding it open as the last few residents exited, letting the shelter empty at its own pace. Linda came out near the end, slower than the others, her heels making that same measured sound against the concrete before transitioning to the gravel outside. She paused just beyond the doorway, looking at the neighborhood, then back at the shelter, then finally at the panel mounted beside the door. The green light was still on, steady, unbothered by everything that had just happened. She exhaled, long and quiet, and for the first time since I had seen her, there was no performance in it. Just a person processing something they had not planned for. "I did not know," she said, not looking directly at me, more like speaking to the moment itself. I stepped out into the open air, letting the door rest partially closed behind me, not locking it, just leaving it ready. "Now you do," I replied. Simple, nothing more needed. A distant siren changed tone, shifting from warning to advisory, signaling what everyone already felt. It was over. Around us, neighbors began moving. Again, checking on each other, picking up what had been knocked over, small conversations starting up as normal life began stitching itself back together. I glanced once more at the panel, then at the door, then out across the street where the wind was now just a breeze moving through the trees. Systems had done their job. The shelter had done its job. And for a few minutes when it mattered most, the difference between being locked out and being inside came down to who understood how those systems really worked. I turned and started walking back toward my truck, the gravel crunching under my boots again, the same sound as before, but lighter now, like the weight had shifted off everything at once. I had just reached my truck when I heard the first set of sirens that were not part of the storm. Different pitch, different purpose. Emergency response, not warning. The sound cut through the quiet aftermath as it approached from the main road, steady and controlled, the kind that tells you someone else is now taking over the situation. I paused with my hand on the door handle and looked back toward the shelter. The neighborhood was shifting again, but this time in a different direction. People were out in their yards now, pointing at branches, checking fences, calling out to neighbors across driveways. The tension had turned into motion. Linda was still standing near the shelter entrance, but she was no longer the center of anything. Two county vehicles rolled into the cul-de-sac, tires crunching over scattered debris, lights still flashing even though the storm had passed. The engines idled low, a steady hum that replaced the chaos from before. Doors opened, and two officials stepped out wearing windbreakers with the county seal printed clearly across the chest. One of them carried a tablet, the other a small radio clipped to his shoulder that crackled with intermittent updates. They moved with purpose, scanning the area, eyes landing almost immediately on the shelter. Systems recognized systems. I leaned against my truck door and watched without stepping forward. No need. The first official approached the panel beside the shelter, glancing at the green indicator. Then at the access port. His expression shifted slightly, not surprise, more like confirmation. He tapped the panel once, then turned toward the second official and gave a small nod. That was enough. They both turned toward Linda. She straightened instinctively as they approached, her posture trying to return to something formal, something controlled. Who authorized the initial lockout? The first official asked, his tone calm but direct. No accusation, just a question that expected a real answer. Linda hesitated for a fraction of a second, then lifted her chin slightly. I did, as HOA president. For liability reasons, she said, the words sounding less certain now that they were being said out loud to someone who did not answer to her. The official did not react immediately. He glanced back at the panel, then at the shelter door, then back at her. This is a county-certified emergency shelter, he said evenly. Access cannot be restricted during an act of warning. The words landed clean, without force, but with weight. Around them, a few neighbors had started to gather, not crowding, just close enough to hear. The second official checked his tablet, scrolling briefly before speaking. Override was triggered under county protocol. Logged and recorded, he added, his voice matter of fact. Linda's eyes shifted, just slightly, in my direction. Not accusation, not anger, just recognition. The first official followed her gaze for a moment, then looked back at the panel again. Good call, he said quietly, almost to himself, before stepping back. There was no applause, no dramatic reaction, just a quiet understanding settling over the scene. The system had done what it was built to do, and someone had known how to use it. The official made a few notes on his device, then spoke again, this time to Linda. We will need a report from the HOA regarding access procedures, he said. Still calm, still controlled, but final. She nodded once, slower than usual, her grip on the clipboard loosening just enough for it to lower at her side. The moment passed without confrontation, without raised voices, but the shift was permanent. Authority had been clarified, not argued, not negotiated, just established. I opened my truck door and slid inside. The seat still warm from earlier, the familiar space grounding after everything that had just unfolded. As I started the engine, I glanced once more at the shelter in the rearview mirror. The green light on the panel was still steady, quiet, and indifferent, like it had been all along. And that was the thing about real authority. It does not need to announce itself. It just works when everything else fails. I let the engine idle for a moment, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, listening to the steady hum replace everything that had come before. The windshield framed a neighborhood that looked almost the same, but not quite. Leaves scattered across the pavement. A mailbox tilted just enough to catch your eye. A fence panel leaning where it used to stand straight. Small changes. The kind you only notice when you slow down and really look. In the rearview mirror, the shelter door stood partially open now. People moving in and out of it freely. No hesitation, no barrier. The panel beside it still glowed green, steady and quiet, like it had no interest in the story that just played out around it. The county officials were still there, speaking with a few residents, taking notes. doing what systems do after they have been tested. Document. Confirm. Adjust if needed. Linda stood a few feet away from them, no longer directing anything, just listening. The clipboard was still in her hand, but it hung at her side now, and used. She glanced once toward my truck, not long enough to hold eye contact, just a brief acknowledgement before looking away again. Not anger, not even embarrassment, just the realization that something had shifted, and it was not shifting back. I eased the truck into gear and rolled forward slowly, tires crunching over bits of gravel and broken twigs, the sound grounding in a way that felt familiar. As I passed the shelter, I caught a closer look at the panel through the side window. The county seal sat there, small and almost forgettable unless you knew what it meant. Authority is not always visible. Most of the time, it is built into things you do not question until you need them to work. A man standing near the entrance lifted a hand in a small wave as I drove by, and I returned it with a nod. Nothing more. No words needed. The understanding was already there. I turned onto the main road, the tires meeting smooth asphalt again, and the neighborhood fell behind me in the mirrors. Emergency vehicles lined the curb further down, their lights still flashing in slow rotations, reflecting off wet pavement in soft pulses of red and blue. Controlled. Organized. Exactly how it should be after something like that. The sky ahead was breaking apart, gray giving way to a lighter blue that pushed through in uneven patches, sunlight starting to filter down in narrow beams that caught on the edges of rooftops and tree lines. The storm had moved on, leaving behind a place that looked the same but felt different if you paid attention. I drove a few miles before pulling into a quiet lot near a maintenance facility, the kind of place most people pass without noticing. I shut off the engine and sat there for a second, the sudden silence filling the space where the noise had been. I reached over, picked up the black case from the passenger seat, and set it back under the console where it belonged. Out of sight. Not gone. Just waiting for the next time a system needed to be reminded what it was built for. There was no report for me to file here. No statement to give. The system had already logged everything that mattered. Timestamps. Access override. Status change. Clean. Precise. I stepped out of the truck and closed the door, the sound sharp and final in the quiet air. Somewhere in the distance, another siren faded out completely, replaced by normal traffic noise. Engines, tires, life moving forward. I took a breath, the air fresh now, carrying none of the weight it had earlier, and started walking toward the building. Moments like that do not need explanation. They do not need recognition. They just leave something behind, a small shift in how people understand where real authority comes from. Not from a clipboard, not from a title printed on a piece of paper, but from the systems that stand between chaos and control and the people who know how to use them when it counts.